Hey everybody, welcome back to Chipstock Investor. It's almost the middle of December. We're starting to think about what we're going to do for 2025. So it's only natural to think about what we did for 2024. In this video, we're going to look at all of our top chip stock picks for 2024, look at how they did, and see if they're still on our list for 2025.
Spoiler, Kasey crushed it this year, like big time. You should be very thankful that her analysis is half of the equation. There's the spoiler.
A lot of it was based on color.
Logos, colors of logos.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
I don't know, it just worked. Okay, so
The favorite logo and logo color method greatly outperformed the market this year.
this is also how I choose March Madness
Oh
teams
boy.
as well.
Okay.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Let's
Scratch that.
let's introduce the first chart. Chart number one. Hopefully you're very familiar with this chart by now, but this is a good place to introduce this discussion because this is the story of what happened to semiconductors in 2024. Top row, accelerated computing, or AKA AI infrastructure, as a lot of investors in Wall Street likes to call it. Brand new market, max growth. And so if you're a company whose name starts with an N or a B or a T, NVIDIA, Broadcom, Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing, you did very, very well this year. If you're a company that does literally anything else, you probably started off the year really well or decent. And then the second half of 2024, you did not so well because, first of all, consumer and then traditional cloud and enterprise, excluding accelerated computing, the recovery is going much more slowly than anyone expected it would. Start of a new growth cycle, but it's ramping up gradually. And then auto and industrial, we're actually still currently at the bottom of the cycle. And we're not expected to get a full-blown recovery now until 2025.
You've also seen this chart a number of times in our videos in recent months, this U-shaped recovery. What we were hoping for was a much sharper recovery, but instead what has happened is it's kind of continued to flatten and bottom in 2024. But there is some expectation that 2025 is going to be a much better year. So that segues into some of our top picks for this last year, 2024. Let's kind of organize this by worst to best. I think that's the best way to do this because then we'll end on a high note.
That's fair, which means I get to go first.
Which means you get to go first. Okay. Actually, fear not, I have one in here as well that did not do so great.
Most of them are mine though, including the first one, Microchip. Microchip, ticker symbol MCHP, total return in 2024, close to 30% down. And you see this one actually held up very well. Like you just mentioned, first half of the year was pretty decent. We were expecting an eventual recovery in auto and industrial chip makers. And then by July, August, these companies started to say, hey, you know what? The recovery is getting delayed. We're looking at 2025 for, by the time our customer inventories are back to normal levels. And now more recently, we're looking at maybe not until summer 2025 before we get a nice, robust recovery. In the midst of all of this, Microchip also fired its CEO. It wasn't just Intel that did that. And longtime CEO and kind of industry superstar, Steve Sanghi, who also shortly thereafter coming back as CEO just a couple months ago, also got a board seat at Intel, came in, closed down one of the fabs in Arizona. Ultimately, what we think this means, Microchip has been in this gradual transition away from making its own chips and using more outsourced manufacturers. Perhaps Microchip is an upcoming Intel Foundry customer after closing down that fab in Arizona. We'll see. That's just speculation on my part, but that's what happened to Microchip.
Yeah, what seemed like kind of bad news, layoffs, closing this fab in Arizona, putting some of their plans on hold, may turn out to be something really positive for them in 2025. Mm-hmm. We'll have to see. Okay, next up, Semiconductor. Onsemi primarily plays in that auto and industrial space, and they have some focus in silicon carbide as well.
Yeah, down almost 20% total return this year. This is another one of my picks that didn't work out so well, but more stable than Microchip. And I believe one of the reasons that is while a lot of companies that manufacture chips in recent months have started to take a harder look at right-sizing their manufacturing capacity, Onsemi actually started doing this several years ago when current CEO Hussein El-Khoury and CFO Thad Trent came in. So we actually think Onsemi is in pretty good shape at this point. Their manufacturing capacity is already right-sized, and they're a leader in silicon carbide, like Kasey said, other power applications, and of course, sensors, including one of the industry leaders in vision sensors. So if you're interested in robotics and some of the chip companies that are going to be enablers of a robotics revolution or whatever the heck we're going to call it, onsemi is one of those companies that you should probably know about. So still happy with this one as well, even though this chart looks really, really ugly.
Okay, time for my chart of shame. Lattice Semiconductor actually looks a lot like the Microchip chart. Lattice is a designer of FPGAs, or field programmable gate arrays, primarily used in everything except AI.
That's probably a fair explanation. So lots of auto, industrial, some data center and cloud, some consumer electronics.
One update that we did included the fact that they had some of their FPGAs in the Apple Vision Pro, and I think you all know how that turned out. Not like the iPhone moment. So
That said, Kasey called it though and said the Vision Pro is going to be a flop. So if you've been here for all along for that, you knew not to have too high of hopes for Apple Vision Pro.
But unfortunately, what that all translated to for Lattice was nearly 12% down on the year. You can see that big drop off there right around June of 2024. That's when CEO James Anderson left. He went over to be CEO of Coherent, and continued drawdown as the market realized that this recovery was going to be taking a lot longer than expected. CEO Ford Tamer came into the company around that bottom in September. There's been this gradual uptick again under his guidance, and very hopeful for 2025.
Yeah, I think maybe one thing I would add here, because this, to be completely fair, Kasey, wasn't your pick. Lattice was a joint pick between the two of us to start the year. So I did have a hand in picking this ugly looking stock chart. One thing that could be leading to this gradual recovery in the stock in recent months is the implosion of Intel, which owns Altera. That's a top Lattice semi-competitor, as well as AMD's Xilinx acquisition. That's the former FPGA pure play pioneer, now known as AMD Embedded. AMD kind of deprioritizing everything in lieu of competing with NVIDIA. So Lattice is basically the lone FPGA pure play left on the market. And I think there's building optimism that Lattice actually comes out on top once we get a more broad semiconductor market recovery. Something to watch for when we start the new year.
Up next, Silicon Motion, ticker symbol SIMO. Only down just over a percent. Not bad.
Okay, this is my third and final sole pick. You see, I kind of had a bent at the beginning of this year, skewing more towards smaller and mid-cap semiconductor players. Very similar story here to the auto industrial players. Silicon Motion plays particularly strongly in the consumer electronics market. If you think back to the first chart we showed you, just a general slower recovery in PCs and smartphones. Silicon Motion makes high-end memory controller chips, high-end flash memory controller chips for a lot of consumer electronics applications. This one, I'm going to just sum this up very briefly. The stock looks very cheap. If you believe this company continues to be the fastest car, there's no moat, but as you perhaps know, we're not a big believer in moats in the tech industry. We believe in fastest cars. If you believe Silicon Motion is still the fastest car in memory controllers, we think this is a pretty cheap stock right now. So another one, ugly chart, but not changing anything for 2025 on this one.
Time to talk about our number one overall joint pick, Qualcomm.
Yeah, between the two of us, Qualcomm was a joint pick. This chart also looks kind of similar to the last one, like Silicon Motion.
Just flipped.
Yeah, except it's ended the year up 17, 20, I don't know. You can check it on December 31st, where the stock ends up at close to, let's just say close to 20% total return when you add in the dividend payments.
Which is not terrible. It's not knock your socks off or anything, but it's not terrible. Qualcomm had a lot of headwinds this year.
Yeah, the market continues to fret over what happens to the Apple relationship in the coming 3 years as Apple potentially winds down its reliance on Qualcomm's 5G modem, first for the low end iPhones and then progressively the rest of the Apple products. But that's kind of being offset by Qualcomm making some really, really great progress elsewhere in its business. Also in maybe, let's say, an extension of the consumer electronics market to a certain extent.
Yeah, they've released that new Snapdragon X Elite chip. Hopefully and eventually that will compete with Apple's M series. We're not sure how this is all going to shake out because it's still a very new thing, but early reports seem at least not negative, I would say. The other great thing that Qualcomm was doing this year is where everybody else was like losing revenue in automotive in their automotive segment, Qualcomm was actually gaining in their automotive segment.
Yeah, it was an epic year for Qualcomm Automotive. Check out the last video we did on Qualcomm or find us on Semiconductor Insider. Before the end of 2024, it's still just $5 a month. Check that out. We've been doing a lot of talk about Qualcomm, including their last investor day. Automotive is headed for a 4 billion, if not much more, per year business in 2025. And eventually, over the next few years, that business line alone could completely offset the losses in Apple. So ultimately, at the end of the day, the reason why this chart looks just okay, we had the big peak in the summer, and then eventually this realization settled in this past summer that, you know what, hey, the consumer electronics market also recovering far more slowly than we originally anticipated. The stock sells off. We think Qualcomm is another one in 2025. Probably not our favorite chip stock again in 2025, but if you're looking for just a good place to start your journey investing in individual chip stocks, Qualcomm covers a lot of bases. And it looks like it's a pretty affordable investment right now, given the low valuation after more great earnings updates and the stock kind of languishing here the second half of the year.
Before we move on to our super awesome picks of 2024, quick word from our sponsor, public.com.
If you have idle cash in your investment account, especially cash that you anticipate perhaps needing within the next 5 years, investing in bonds actually might be a pretty decent place to stash that cash right now, right, Kasey?
Yes, absolutely. Especially with the Fed decreasing interest rates, that would mean that interest rates would also go down in your savings account. So having a bond account may make some great sense for you for your uninvested cash.
And thanks to another sell-off in the bond market, annualized yields on bonds have actually come back up again. And with the new bond account at public.com, you can actually lock in an annualized yield of over 6% right now. Not a terrible return at all, especially for some shorter term or midterm cash that you think you might be tapping into soon.
You do need to act quick because you don't lock in that rate until you invest. You can check out our link, public.com/CSI, and lock in your rate.
All right. Let me tee this up for you, Kasey. We're getting into the awesome picks of the year, and one of them is a joint pick. Two of them are your picks all alone. We'll start with this one first. The lesser of your two awesome picks, Pure Storage, which was your top pick because you said the logo and the branding and the color coordination of the branding was top notch.
That was all, really.
That's it. That was the extent of Kasey's research on Pure Storage.
Just kidding. It's not serious, but not bad either. 83% year to date on the total return. We'll see where it ends up in a couple more weeks. But Pure Storage has some pretty awesome potential. We just did an updated video on Pure Storage's announcement that they're working with a hyperscaler to transition away from hard disk drives in data centers to their flash storage systems. And what was interesting about that deal, in brief, is that Pure Storage isn't going to be selling hardware to this hyperscaler, but actually designing the systems for them. And then they also have a partnership with Kioxia. But ultimately, I guess when you boil this all down, Pure Storage has a massive opportunity heading into a new year.
Yeah, it really does. So does Kioxia. Interesting timing on that announcement. between Pure Storage and Kioxia expanding their partnership. We can assume both working with the same hyperscaler. Maybe it's Oracle Cloud, maybe it's Amazon AWS, Microsoft Azure, maybe it's Google Cloud. We don't know, one of those four. But Kioxia just had its IPO over there in Japan. So interesting things going on in the land of all flash enterprise storage. And I suspect you'll hear a lot more from Kasey in 2025 on Pure Storage. We're still more than happy to hold this one for the long term as well.
Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing, or TSM. This one was a joint pick, like a joint bonus pick for Nick and I, up nearly 96% year to date. Not bad at all. TSMC is the leader in chip manufacturing. They're heavily tied at the hip with manufacturing chips for companies like NVIDIA.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Apple, Qualcomm, you name it, even for Intel, right? Intel's woes well documented. Even as Intel tries to play catch up with what TSMC is capable of, they're having to rely on TSMC as well. So this is quite literally the semiconductor industry powerhouse in a very literal sense. And that's probably not going to change anytime soon. Intel and Samsung have lots of idle fab capacity, including advanced chip making capabilities. But there's really two issues that we've been discussing with our Semiconductor Insider members if you would like to join in learning more about this. First, TSMC is only a third-party manufacturer. Both Intel and Samsung currently, anyways, their foundries primarily manufacture Intel products and Samsung products, respectively. That creates some conflict of interest for potential customers. And then in addition to that, also you just have some general problems with Intel and Samsung perhaps not being quite as technologically capable as TSMC on these advanced nodes. And that creates some questions if you're a potential customer. Am I going to get the same level of quality as I would with TSMC? As is with anything in life, paying the cheapest cost possible should not be your top priority. That's especially so in the semiconductor market. TSMC is in great shape for 2025.
Cue the drum roll. This is our best performing pick over the last year.
It needs no introduction, but you're being very modest. This was your top overall pick of 2024. So feel free to take a victory lap here.
Up 188% year to date.
Let's just call it 200%.
Pretty decent.
Yeah, not bad. Not bad.
I feel like it really helped us out a lot.
Okay. I want to ask the question though, because I think it maybe will help everybody to know what was your thinking going into 2024 when you were like, you know what? You know who's going to do the best out of everybody in the semiconductor industry? NVIDIA. And I couldn't argue with you. It's not that I disagreed, but I did have some questions about at the beginning of the year, the momentum and what happens when they start, after GTC and they started talking about Blackwell, what's going to happen with the ramp up of that new, very ambitious project. What was your simple reasoning with this when you said this is going to be the best semiconductor pick of 2024?
I think that I can simply say that Jensen Huang was very convincing to me. I really believed in what he was saying. And I still do. And I think ultimately that comes down to the fact that I felt like what would stop NVIDIA? There was really no reason for the momentum to stop. We have kind of transitioned into this stage or this era, if you want to call it that, of AI. And that is literally all that's talked about on various earnings calls, on analyst reports, on the news. And they're the ones fueling all of this.
Mm-hmm. And it's true. Even the doubters that thought, you know what, this accelerated computing hype is going to blow over. Does really every single CPU-based system on the planet need ripped out and replaced with a GPU? The answer is no. The CPU is definitely not going away. In fact, even an accelerated computing system obviously has a CPU in it as well. But the answer is also yes. Why wouldn't you accelerate your computing workload? It's just overall more efficient. And we've discussed this over this past summer extensively. AI is the term that gets slapped on this, but it's not just AI, right? It's more broadly, it's accelerated computing, and it's just more efficient than the old way of doing things.
And you'll get left behind if you don't do it at this point.
Yeah, exactly. The arms race among the hyperscalers and big data center operators is very much a real thing.
And just a quick spoiler, if you haven't watched that Pure Storage video, you should watch it because this plays into it. Once you reach the tipping point of something, you can see massive changes very quickly.
Absolutely. That's a good reminder. Okay, NVIDIA, we're still very happy to continue holding that headed into 2025. We will have a second follow-up video to this one here in just a couple of weeks, outlining what exactly our top semiconductor stock holdings are in our portfolio. So stay tuned for that. But long story short, all of these positions that we just outlined for 2024, we're still very happy continuing to hold. And some of them we would add to at this point. So let's dissect this a little bit. But first, Kasey, on an equal weighted basis, tell the folks at home what was our total return for the year.
Yeah, 41% total return, even with those few duds that we picked. NVIDIA and Pure Storage, TSM all bailed us out significantly. And 41% is not bad. This is just in our chip stock portfolio.
Yeah, and not only does this beat the market, it beats the iShares Semiconductor SOXX index. It's about on par with SMH, the Van Eck ETF, right now on a total return basis. Again, we'll see how it finishes through the end of the year, but 3 years in a row, we have beaten not just the market, but also the semiconductor industry indices. We are really, really happy with these picks. And also, as you'll see here in a couple of weeks with our follow-up video, what we're showing you here is on an equal weighted basis. In all actuality, if you've been following along with us since the beginning, you know that we're not equally weighted across all these stocks. We do tend to weight based on market cap. So I guess
stay tuned.
Yeah, stay tuned. Kasey's being modest again, but chip stock investors did much better than 41% total return in 2024.
So just to recap, end markets, not accelerated computing, have been in a significant downturn, but they are seemingly coming out of that and at the start of a new growth cycle, even auto and industrial. And so let's briefly discuss where our top picks in this segment, auto and industrial, and then the power and sensor basket of stocks, you could say, where do we put them?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you'll see more on this in the video coming out in 2 weeks on our top semiconductor holdings in our portfolio. None of these 5 companies make the list, but at this point, we do treat them as a basket. Basically, what that means is all sort of one inclusive position, betting on auto, industrial, power, and sensors. The larger 3 in this basket are the ones on top, Onsemi, Microchip, and more recently, Monolithic Power Systems. And then the small bets, far smaller than 1% of our total portfolio value, Air and Axcelis. Because of where we're at in the cycle, I think my final takeaway from all of this is, I'm certainly not going to bail out now at the bottom of a cycle. I'm adding to these as the cycle continues to bottom out. And as we start to near what could be an inflection point, a turnaround in the end market for these companies, as customer inventories normalize, there will eventually be a snapback in these stocks. And so I still feel pretty good about where we're at with this. That's my, final take in this segment on my ugly, horrible, no good, rotten, dud stock picks for 2024. I still like them for 2025. I'm not changing anything.
And I support you.
Thanks.
One thing that you might find interesting, especially if you watched like 3 of our videos, is that we didn't have any of the Fab 5 equipment companies in this 2024 chip stock picks. ASML, Applied Materials, Lam Research, KLA Corp, and Tokyo Electron. Those 5 companies make up over 70% of the manufacturing equipment sales in the industry, and we truly believe that it's a choke point in the industry. We'll discuss that a little bit more in that next video that we talk about for 2025. For more discussion on these companies and pretty much everything else in the semiconductor industry, check our Semiconductor Insider membership out. Link in the description below for our Ko-fi page. You can sign up for that membership before January 1st. It's only $5 a month.
And maybe nearer term, we'll also have a video out later this weekend on Google's new quantum computing chip. We're going to take a different angle on it that isn't being talked about, but we talked about this past spring when we talked about where to invest in quantum computing. And someone's got to manufacture those chips, and the equipment's got to come from somewhere. Who is it? We're going to see if we can find out and let you know.
Thanks everybody for watching this episode of Chip Stock Investor. Make sure you like, subscribe, and share our video with your friends. See you all again soon.